Hey everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold. This is our weekly lecture series. Great players of the past, although some would argue Alexander Morozevich, who's the subject of our lecture, isn't from the past. He's only 46, but I don't know, the last 5 to 7 years, I don't really play chess anymore. And according to Wikipedia, he's actually playing Go now. And he's won Dan in Go, which I don't know how good that is, but it's better Go than I am, since I don't know how to play. Morozevich, very popular player, because he plays very unusual openings, super aggressive, doesn't draw very much. And as a consequence of his style, he's beaten a lot of very strong players. At his peak in 2008, he was second in the world by rating. He's a two-time world championship candidate in 2005 and 2007, two-time Russian champion, and he's represented Russia in 7 Chess Olympiads, winning numerous team and board medals. And the Wikipedia page talks about his top ratings and his current rating and tournaments he played in and so forth. They also mention that he likes to play the Chigorin. He actually wrote a book on the Chigorin. He co-authored it, which I can't say about any other super GM. He's the only one. Actually, take that back. I think Richard Rapport plays the Chigorin occasionally, but that's occasionally. And it says he's played the Albin counter gambit, and that actually sounds like my opening repertoire from the 80s and 90s. The Albin counter gambit and the Chigorin. Very suspicious openings, but very interesting. He's very good at blindfold chess. And there used to be a tournament, which doesn't exist anymore, called Melody Amber. It says Amber Melody. That's not right. It's Melody Amber. Melody Amber is the daughter of the sponsor of the tournament. It's in the south of France, and half of it was rapid and half was blindfold rapid. And all the best players in the world were playing all the time. And he was doing very well, first or second, very often in the blindfold section. Okay, and Morozevich is one of my favorite players because he doesn't play for a draw, and he plays crazy against everybody. He doesn't say like, well, now I'm playing Karpov, so I gotta calm it down. He doesn't do that. What's funny is, I think, I could be wrong, I think the only time I've seen Morozevich is I went to the Tal Memorial in 2011. I was working with Hikaru, and he was the highest rated spectator at the tournament, and that's saying something, because there were probably 20 or 30 grandmasters spectating the Tal Memorial. And what's funny is Morozevich had played in the Tal Memorial the year before. Now he's a spectator. That's also the only time I've seen Averbach. And he was, I think, 90 when I saw him. He was there every day watching the tournament. So anyway, let's have a look at some of Morozevich's best games. Okay, first game, he's playing Konstantin Sakaev, and this is in the Russian Championship Super Final in 2007. And in Russia, before all this stuff happened with the Ukraine and such, they would have lots of tournaments that would qualify into other tournaments, etc. And then you would qualify to the Super Final if you were, basically one of the top 10 players in Russia, which obviously Morozevich was with 2755 FIDE, obviously one of the top 10 players in the world. And he's playing Sakaev, who's only 2634 FIDE. And I think, I don't want to say this is my favorite game of the lecture, but it's the game that speaks to me more than the other games because of the way I play chess. Typically, Alexander plays moves I wouldn't play or understand when he's being creative. And this game, although he was creative, I sort of understood what he was doing. Okay, so he's white, and they play a Slav. Okay, and he plays the exchange Slav, Morozevich. Typically, the exchange Slav is considered boring, typically. Okay, bishop f4, e3. And if white wants to get an advantage in the exchange Slav, typically they try to avoid playing knight f3 quickly, because then black can play bishop g4 and pin the knight. Okay, so a6, and this is what I played with black when I played the Slav. I played a6. Then he played rook c1. He's intentionally not playing knight f3, waiting for black to make a decision about his bishop, either going to f5 or playing e6. And then he could play knight f3 if he wants to. So bishop g4 was played. White's not going to pin his own knight. So white played f3, which you should never do. Never play f3 unless you're Morozevich. So if Morozevich is watching this lecture, why are you watching my lecture? Okay, so bishop back to d7. And the reason Sakaev did that, if the bishop goes to f5 or h5, white's going to play g4 and h4 and start a quick attack on the king side. So he puts his bishop back on d7, and he claims f3 hurts white rather than helps him. Okay, g4 anyway, because he's Morozevich, so he plays very actively. e6, h4. And this is a better version for black than if black's bishop was over here getting trapped. Now it's here nice and safe. Bishop e7, bishop d3, castles into the attack. But you can't blame him because you can't really ever castle queenside. That's even crazier. And if you don't know the rules of chess very well, then you can't castle queenside anyway. Okay, if you know the rules, you can, but that's different. Okay, so he castled. And then bishop b1 with the obvious idea of putting the queen in front of the bishop on the diagonal, and eventually he'll play queen h7 mate. There's no way Sakaev would see that. Oh, wait a minute. No, he'll see that. Okay, queen b6, attacking the b2 pawn. White defended it in a very original way, rook h2. And maybe Morozevich at his prime was the person you would expect to be the most creative and play moves that you wouldn't expect. So white's not going to castle this game, and the rook on h2 defends the b2 pawn. Okay, rook fc8, h5, putting it in h, bishop e8, black's setting up a defense, queen d3, and queen d3 makes a serious threat if white could play g5 attacking the knight, and the knight moves away, then we take on h7. Queen d3 looks weird to me because I would assume black plays knight b4. Hey, black played knight b4. Okay. Then the queen went back to d2. Knight d7. Knight h3, completing development, I guess. Knight f8, defending the h7 pawn. Bishop g5, attacking the bishop. Queen defends the bishop. They trade. And then f4. So, probably at the beginning, Morozevich was thinking, I'm going to attack my opponent and try to checkmate him. Now, he's playing more positionally by putting his three center-like pawns on dark squares. He's making his bishop good, not blocked by the pawns, and this bishop is blocked by all of black's pawns. So white has the better bishop, and white has more space in the center because black can't move in the center. And a lot of people, especially low-rated people, when you don't castle, they get very nervous. They're like, I have to castle. In fact, my mom, who occasionally played chess, and when I say occasionally, maybe in her life she played like 20 games. she had to castle. That's all she wanted to do in the game was castle. She didn't want to do nothing else. So she would be shocked at white's play in this position. Okay, f6, never play f6. Black wants to play e5 and fight in the center. King f2, queen d6. Then knight g1, Morozevich decides his knight's better on f3 than on h3. Rook c7 to double rooks. Knight f3, he doubles rooks. h6, putting more pawns on dark squares. g6, a3, the knight goes back to c6, and e4. And if I was white, I would be very scared to play e4. But problem is if I play something like g5, then white has a positional advantage because that's the worst bishop ever. And my knight can go to e5 and your knights cannot go to e4. But it's hard for white to win because it's so blocked. So Morozevich doesn't want it to get blocked. So he opens up the game with e4. Queen went back to d8. Bishop a2, putting pressure on the d5 pawn. Knight e7, defending the d5 pawn. And then e5. And again, if I was white, I would worry that f5 for black would close the position too much for me to win. And that's what happened. f5. White played rook g1. White doesn't want to close the position. White's trying to win. Rook c6. Black just chills and says, white can't do anything. Bishop b1. He's putting tremendous pressure on black's king side here with all his pieces pointed that way. King h8, getting off the file of the white rook. Puts another rook on the file. And then finally he takes. I mean, that's not something that I would do. But he gets the f5 square for his knight. Sakaev does. Takes. Bishop f7. Knight e2, bringing his knight into the game on the king's side. Knight g5. And black probably thought with this construction, bishop g8, and these pieces here, white can't break through. There's no way to keep going for white. Rook g3, knight b6, the knight wants to go to c4. b3, knight can't go to c4 anymore. Queen f8, a4, a5, stopping the knight from going here, gaining some space. It doesn't look like either side could ever win here because nobody can do anything. I'm sure that's what Sakaev thought. Like, everything's blocked, and I just sit here and I draw it. Knight b8, b4, knight c6, rook c1. Morozevich now goes over to the queen's side, and he allows black to play queen takes h6, which he did. And it's interesting for me to wonder if Sakaev would have lost the game if he just sat tight. Like, what would Morozevich done to win? Morozevich could get his knight maybe to c5 somehow or b6. I'm not sure if that would win, but you could. If he plays knight c5, he has tremendous pressure on e6. So maybe eventually white can win, but black's like a pawn is a pawn. I'll take a pawn. Okay, then rook h3, the queen moves back, and f5, and I'm sure f5 was a big surprise for Sakaev because that looks suicidal. Why is white giving his pawn away? And the reason is we're getting this diagonal for our queen, and we're getting the f4 square for our knight. Knight takes f5, knight f4. Now white's threatening knight takes g6 check, and the h-pawn's pinned, and the queen's attacked, and so forth. So queen e8, that defends both of black's weak points on e6 and g6. Now, it's not a game where it's going to be a draw because it's all blocked up. Now somebody's going to win. Either white's going to crash through, or black is going to be 2 pawns up, because he's 2 pawns up, and the D pawn is weak. So either black is going to crash through on the queen side and center, or white's going to crash through on the king side. Bishop takes f5. That knight was too strong. E takes f5. Rook c5. White still has a tremendous positional bind, even though he's down 2 pawns. Rook d8, queen e3, and black played h5. That must have been a tough decision for him. e6. Here comes the e pawn, rook e7, and always sacrifice the exchange. Rook takes c6. White wants the e5 square for his queen. And this bishop is very sad. Queen e5 check, rook g7 is the only legal move. Queen f6. And this is looking very dicey for black. It's hard to suggest a move because the king can't legally move. If the bishop goes to h7, knight f7 check wins a rook. And if you move your queen, like queen f8, then I can take on g6 with check. Your queen's defending g6. In fact, that's checkmate, which I just realized. Not only is white winning the queen, but the game's over because it's checkmate. Okay, so black doesn't have a lot to do here. So he played rook b8, getting his rook off of attack. e7. Again, if you move your queen, this not only wins your queen, but it's checkmate. So the game's over. And you can't take with the rook because the computer won't let me. Because it's illegal, it's pinned. Okay, so he played bishop h7, defending the g6 pawn. Now maybe he can play queen takes e7 because he defended the g6 pawn. But rook e3, now you can't play queen takes e7. And you can see that black is it's a total bind. Black can't do anything. Black is just sitting here waiting to lose. King g8, unpinning his rook. Check, back to h8. Always repeat. And then queen d6. Now, if it was white's turn to move, white is threatening queen takes rook, and then he promotes his pawn to the queen, and white ends up a piece ahead. So black played rook a8, so you can't take the rook. Queen c7, rook g8. It's very hard to suggest a move for black. Black's almost stalemated. The problem with moving the h pawn is eventually I'll take with the rook and I'll get an attack on the h file. And also moving the h pawn doesn't do anything, I can just take it. So it doesn't really help black. So rook g8, knight f to e6. And in this position, Sakaev resigned because white has a very big threat and there's no answer to it. First of all, I don't even know what black should play in this position. But white's threatening queen e5 check and then queen takes rook checkmate. And black's bishop doesn't play at all. So it's sort of like white's a piece up with a passed pawn on the 7th rank. So in this position, Sakaev resigned. And this game won the best game prize for the Russian Super Final. And you can see black is totally tied down, can't move anything. And it was very creative from Morozevich. First he sacked one pawn, then a second pawn, then the exchange. Then he got a passed pawn, his knight's infiltrated. And unfortunately for Sakaev, bishop on h7 was always bad. He played bishop g4 in the opening. After f3, he went back to d7, and that was the end of his bishop. It never got to a good square. And white dominated all of the board. And actually, white sacrificing those pawns gave him avenues for his pieces to come in and attack black, because the pawns weren't blocking him. So f5 was a brilliant move, and sacking the exchange was relatively obvious for a player of that strength. So great game from Morozevich. Okay, now a lot of people watching on YouTube are probably thinking one thing. Okay, you're not thinking two things, that's too many things. You're thinking one thing. And you're thinking, who's Sakaev? Okay, and that's the problem with being a grandmaster in Russia. because nobody knows who you are because they have 100 grandmasters. So you're just one out of many. And if you're not one of the top 10 or 20 players in the world, then nobody outside of Russia's heard of you. Now, I've heard of Sakaev because I was a professional player, and Sakaev was good. So I heard of Sakaev. But a lot of the people who've only heard of the top players in the world, wonder who he is. And what's funny is I like to call people Rufus and Doofus when they don't play very well. And Sakaev's middle name is Rufovich. So he's literally a Rufus. There's the Russian version. I mean, Russian Rufuses are 26-30 FIDE. That's how good they are. Okay, next game, we're going to get rid of your fears that you're not going to hear of Morozevich's opponents. His next opponent is Vladimir Kramnik, who you have heard of. Okay, I don't care who you are, you've heard of Vladimir Kramnik. Okay, Kramnik was the world champion. Kramnik's one of the greatest players who ever lived. And right now, currently, he's one of the craziest, accusing everyone who's ever played chess online of cheating. Everybody cheats but him. Okay, he even wrote a children's book called Everyone Cheats. That's the name of the book. Okay, hopefully some of you got that joke. Now, these players are so high rated, they have the same rating, 2788 FIDE. Okay, that's pretty good rating in 2008. Okay, this is in the Tall Memorial. This is actually the tournament that I went to in 2011, but this is 3 years earlier. Okay, Morozevich is white. He plays a known pawn sacrifice that was co-invented by Shirov and Shabalov, because they're both Latvian, and they were analyzing it, and they both play it. We give Shirov the credit because he's a better player. Then I'll teach you Shabalov. Okay, and it's the semi-Slav, and in this position, after bishop d6, white has a funny move here, and this move was played for about a year in Grandmaster play. I haven't shown you the move yet. And at some point, Michael Adams played it against Kasparov. And that move is g4. And Kasparov had never seen g4 before, even though it's been played several times at that time. He just never saw it. And Kasparov just crushed Michael Adams. He said, that move's terrible. And I know Kasparov played d takes c, and I think it might have gone g5, knight d5, something like that. But Kasparov won in like 24 moves with black. He just thought g4 is ridiculous. But g4 is very common. It became common for several years. So Kramnik played knight takes g4. That's one of the main lines. Rook g1. Kramnik took on h2, which I don't think has a good reputation. I don't think super GMs do that anymore. They traded, and rook takes g7. So black's a pawn ahead, but white's threatening the h7 pawn. And black's going to have a hell of a time getting his king safe. It's not easy for black to castle queenside. And white's just going to start attacking, and he doesn't really care about the extra pawn. Okay, knight f8, very passive move. Rook g2, kicking the bishop out, and e4. So Morozevich likes to play e4, just not on move 1. And he's attacking, and he's just saying, you have an extra pawn, that doesn't matter. I'm attacking you. You're not going to make it to the endgame. Knight g6, solid. Bishop g5, attacking the queen. Bishop e7. They trade, and white castles. So probably, if black had his druthers, he would castle queenside. But even then, you've got to be careful. CD's coming and the C file's open to your king. So Kramnik's king is going to have a tough time. Now Kramnik, when he plays chess, when he was in top form, like now, he wants to get a slight advantage, then a clear advantage, and then win, and then you had no chance. Very similar to Karpov. And Morozevich liked to play a little loose. aggressive, sacrifice, complicated, confuse the opponent, tall style. So Morozevich had a good style against Kramnik. Kramnik doesn't get the kind of game he likes. Here he has to be a pawn up and defend, and he has to defend forever. And sort of like the last game, this bishop is no good. Just like the last game with Sakaev. Okay, so he played DE, because, I mean, the D pawn is attacked. It's attacked 3 times and defended twice. So he takes, knight takes, F5, very loose move, but he's obviously very worried White's going to play C5 and knight D6 check. So he's like, no, you're not going to do that. Okay, knight goes back to D2, probably wants to go to F3 and control all these dark squares. C5, also a very aggressive move from Kramnik. Takes, bishop D7, B4. And I'm sure when Kramnik didn't play queen takes C5 in this position, which is what I play, he probably didn't think White was going to play B4 because that looks crazy. And that's just Morozevich's game, crazy. So he played bishop G7, thought, oh, I'll take it later. My bishop has C6, my rook has C8. And Morozevich is like, well, you didn't take my pawn, so I'm going to defend it. So now both kings are a little loose. And the game, to me, is relatively nonsensical for a game that's not rapid blitz or bullet. If this was a blitz game or a bullet game, this would be completely normal. In a slow game, when 2 of the top 5 players in the world are playing, we usually don't see such a mess. Unless Morozevich is playing, then we see a mess. Okay, he castled queenside, did Kramnik. Rook G3, here comes the rook. E5, rook D3. The D6 square looks pretty nice. Or I could move my knight and my rooks are doubled. And after bishop E6, he went to A3. He said, oh, I'm going to take that pawn. That's a good idea. So A6, then C6. And Black's queen side is falling apart, and his king is there, so that's not good. Takes C5. He doesn't want to take with the rook. He wants to take with the bishop. The pawn's not going anywhere. Queen G5, pinning the knight. Then he takes with the rook because the C6 pawn is attacked. And King D7, that's a very funny way to defend your pawn, because the knight can't move with discovered check because the knight can't move, it's pinned. So this kind of weird position, which is somewhat nonsensical, that's Morozevich's kind of game. The reason Kramnik did that is White soon is going to play queen A4 and just checkmate the black king. So he's running away. Kramnik's running his king to the queen side, to the king side. Bishop C4, takes. Knight E7, defending. King C2, that's a funny attacking move. That has a big threat. King C2 unpins the knight, so now the knight can go to E4 or F3, and it's check, and the queen's attacked. So now Kramnik can castle kingside. Castled queenside, put his king back on E8. Oh, wait a minute, he can't castle kingside, it's illegal. Oh, it's too bad. Okay. Knight F3, attacking the queen. Rook D6, double exclam. If I was White, I would play rook takes rook check and try to get at that black king. But Morozevich is better than me, plays rook D6. And this opens up more lines for him. Now in this position, White has 2 threats, one for each of you. He's threatening the knight, and he's threatening rook check, attacking this rook. So if you play queen takes, then I win your rook in the corner. I don't win your rook in the corner if you don't play queen takes, because your queen's defending it. However, I will take your knight. So the only way to not lose your rook and not lose your knight is to move your knight. Unfortunately, when you move your knight, I have queen takes C6 check. And then I have 3 passed pawns on the queen side, and I'm checkmating you also. So in this position, Kramnik resigned. And that's a very unusual game because Kramnik never loses to anybody, not in 2008. And this game, he castled queenside and moved his king back to the king side. So the final position is very crushing. And the game itself was very confusing, and Morozevich is good at that. He's good at confusing. Okay, and you probably have heard of the last opponent, Gata Kamsky. Gata Kamsky's been U.S. champion several times. He's played for the World Championship, the World FIDE Championship against Karpov. And he's won many strong tournaments in the U.S. and abroad. He's played all over the world. He's been top 10, top 5 in the world. And now he plays, now sort of like Kramnik, he plays blitz chess on chess.com and accuses half of his opponents of cheating. Okay, so I guess when you get older and you're not like world class anymore, you're not top 5, top 10 in the world, everybody must be cheating, otherwise you would be. Exactly. My phone says it all. Okay, so Morozevich is white. This is in a rapid tournament, the Russian Team Championship Rapid. Okay, Kamsky plays the Dutch, and that's like poking the bear or the tiger or the lion. You're poking them. Because Morozevich likes wild and crazy chess, and Kamsky plays the Dutch. So that's like an invitation to, make the game complicated, interesting, crazy. And that's not Kamsky's forte. Usually Kamsky only plays f5 if he really needs to win. Maybe he did need to win, I don't know. Okay, Morozevich played bishop f4 because that's an unusual move. So he has to do that. Knight f6 and e3. He gets his bishop out of the pawn chain before he plays e3. And if you're watching on YouTube, you probably just think that white's playing a London and black played f5. You'll just say, oh, this is a London. So white's playing the London, which is funny because that's what Kamsky plays with white. So, okay, so d6, knight c3. It's the Jobava London against the Dutch. g6, the Leningrad Dutch. h4. Why play h4? He's Morozevich. He plays h4. Most super grandmasters develop their pieces and castle and play for small advantages and put pressure on you. And Morozevich always just plays wild and crazy. But he calculates really well. So, okay, bishop e6. Unusual move. I guess he wants his bishop on f7 to defend his king side. Knight f3, h6. Otherwise, knight g5 is very annoying. Bishop d3. He did develop his pieces. c6, e4. So in all three games, Morozevich played d4 on move 1, and then later in the game played e4. And the reason this is good, if you're not good at calculating, which is likely, is white has all of his minor pieces out, and black has his bishop and knight out, and nothing else. So white has more development. That means you should open the position so your pieces are active. And you are trying to play e4 in the Dutch. Usually you just can't, but played it here. Takes, 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 takes. Now the g-pawn's attacked. Bishop f5, knight d2. This is a brilliant move because now he wants to take and play queen h5 check. He opened up this diagonal for his queen. Also, he would like takes and knight takes. Then the knight's good on e4. Kamsky played queen d7, queen e2, knight a6, developing a piece, takes. And in this position, there's a tactic, which I don't know if he would have played it. If you play queen takes, I could play bishop takes d6. I don't know if he would play bishop takes d6, but he could. Then I don't know, black could play here, and I'm too confused to play this position. I give up. Okay, and maybe he wouldn't have even played that, but I think so. Kamsky must not have liked that. He took with the g-pawn, queen h5 check, king d8. Kamsky thought his king was safe over here. Black pieces are all there. There's no white pieces there. All right. Short castle, Knight b4 attacking c2. In my opinion, that's going too far. Black should be like getting his king safe, getting his rook out, getting his bishop out, and trying to complete development and get his king to a safe square. And instead, Kamsky says, let me take that c pawn. And he probably thought, white will defend the c pawn or move it, and then I have knight d5. And I have a good square for my knight. But he played c4. Now you can't play knight d5. And once again, Kamsky got greedy. Instead of developing and getting his king safe, played knight c2, because that wins a pawn. And Morozevich is like, take my pawn, I dare you, I double dare you. And then, very strangely, Morozevich said, do they speak English and what? And Kamsky didn't understand the reference. Okay, knight takes d4, black's a pawn up, but Morozevich is glad to get rid of that pawn, because now he has an attack on the d file. Knight b3, takes, and black's king isn't looking very good. b6, white wants to play c5. So b6 stops c5. Bishop e5 attacking the rook. You can't take the bishop because you lose your queen. So rook h7, queen g6, and that rook doesn't have a lot of squares. On the other hand, if you played rook to g8, then queen f7 is just winning. You can't defend anything here. Okay, so I think b6 just loses immediately, and he had to do something. Maybe he could play bishop g7, and then if c5, he could play d5. So maybe he wasn't that worried about c5, actually. But b6 is too much. Is Kamsky moving these pieces? No. He's moving his knight, knight a6, knight b4, knight c2, knight takes d4, knight takes b3. Moves his knight 5 times and then trades it. And now black has no development, black's king is no good, and the rook on h8 is basically trapped. Okay, so rook h7 here, and maybe Kamsky thought he could save himself by playing the move e6. And that doesn't work because black is overworked. Black's queen is defending the rook and defending the d6 pawn. So you take one, then you take the other one. Okay, that's how chess works. So he took on d6. And we must take that, because if we don't take that bishop, there's going to be discovered everything. Okay, Columbus will discover America again, just like he did the first time, except for one thing. Okay, so he takes. Queen g8 check. That's even better than rook takes d6. Okay, because if the queen goes to e8, you lose this rook. And if the king moves, you lose this rook. So after queen g8, most people would resign. But it's good that he didn't resign, because we get to see more tactics from Morozevich. We call that Morozevich tactics. King c7, he takes the rook. White's up the exchange for nothing, and white has an attack against the black king. Not resigning here is weird, but Kamsky is known as a late resigner. Doesn't want to resign too early. So he played c5, and this position, everything wins, but Morozevich played a great tactic just to finish him off. But it's impossible not to win. Everything wins. But Morozevich played queen a7 check, king c6, and in this position, he played very nice tactic. Pause your video if you're watching on YouTube and see if you can find the crushing move for white. Almost any reasonable move is winning, but this move is the most winning. And it's also very fun to play. Okay, you've unpaused your video. Rook takes d6 check. Okay, black has two legal moves. Queen takes, which loses the rook on h7, so white's a rook ahead. And king takes, which is even worse. Then I play rook d1 check, and I win your queen. Actually, that's not worse, that's like the same. So after rook takes d6, black resigned. I mean, playing king c6 That shows a lot of chutzpah, like not resigning and playing king c6. And then Morozevich put him in his place and said, well, now I win all your pieces. So you could see White's king was very safe that game. And in the other, the three games we looked at with Sakaev, Kramnik, and Kamsky, their kings were never safe. And eventually he broke through, attacking, and won the games. And Morozevich has beaten many strong grandmasters like Kramnik and Kamsky. He's beaten Karpov, he's beaten Anand, and just about any other top player you can think of. Very talented player. He played his own chess. He didn't stick by, the Russian, every Russian schoolboy knows. He didn't play that way. He played his own way, very creative. And he did something which I try to get a lot of my students to do, but they're not good at it yet. And that's make problems for your opponent. Not just play good moves for yourself, but make it difficult for your opponent to play good moves. If your opponent's playing all good moves, then you're not making it tough on them. And obviously, Morozevich playing g4, h4, g5, h5, e4. He's always pressing and giving his opponent big problems. Now, you probably can't calculate as well as Morozevich, but who can? I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold, and I want to thank our sponsor. If you want to sponsor a lecture, contact Karen. Her email is karen@atlchessclub.com. And please like and subscribe and leave a comment. And we have every Monday, we try to have a lecture, and it takes about a week to put it on YouTube. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.